Today our focus is going to be on secondary sources. Secondary sources are a wonderful place to begin any legal research problem. It's important because it provides context about the law, gives you a general overview, and can help you identify those specific important legal terms of art.
Hi students, today we're going to talk about secondary sources. It's going to be in the form of a narrated PowerPoint. All right, so here is our PowerPoint on secondary sources. So I really like secondary sources because it is a great place to begin your legal research. Let me tell you a story of when I was a first-year law student. I was clerking at a law firm, and my very first assignment involved trademark law. Now, how many of you have already studied trademark law as a law student? Probably most of you have never studied that, not yet at least. And so I really didn't know where to begin. Well, I'm telling you right now, the very best place to begin, if you don't know anything about the topic, is a secondary source. That's because it does a really good job of providing overview of the law, and it's an amazing finding tool that will lead you to the primary authority that you need to do your research. Now, secondary sources can be updated. Sometimes. It really depends on the type of source. Law review articles tend to not be updated at all, but treatises can be updated. If you're using a secondary source on Westlaw or Lexis, or if you're going to the books, make sure you always check any supplementary materials. You may already remember in book form, it may be in the form of a separate volume or a pocket part in the back of the book or next to it. But like I said, some secondary sources aren't updated at all, but that still doesn't mean they're not really, really valuable. Here are some examples of some of the most popular secondary sources. State encyclopedias, treatises, including foreign books, law review articles, restatements of the law, uniform laws and model acts, ALR or American Law Reports, practice materials, and national encyclopedias and dictionaries. Today, we're going to talk about 3 of those: state encyclopedias, treatises, and law review articles. Let's start with state encyclopedias. Like texture, some of you may have heard of texture, which is short for Texas jurisprudence. A state encyclopedia defines various areas of law while providing citations to leading state cases and relevant state statutes. A state encyclopedia is so much better than a national encyclopedia. You may have been familiar with AmJur for American Jurisprudence or CJS for Corpus Juris Secundum. Those are national encyclopedias. I love state encyclopedias because they are so much more specific. They're thorough. They tend to be better organized than the national journals. All you have to do is look for JUR for jurisprudence behind the state. Now, it's not available in all states. I think right now we have only about 17 state encyclopedias. But the good news is Texas has one, texture. Other state encyclopedias include California Jur, Ohio Jur, and Florida Jurisprudence. Now that we've had a chance to talk about the state encyclopedias, I want to turn our attention to another important resource, and that would be the treatise. A treatise is a book or set of books that is devoted to really in-depth coverage of a particular subject. It may be torts, it may be criminal procedure, it may be labor and employment, family law. They have treatises in so many different topic areas. A treatise tends to be very scholarly in nature. It's highly respected, it's very easy to use, it's a book, and they tend to be updated. It has broad coverage of a lot of concepts. So if you want to look at everything there is to know about tort law, for example, then a good treatise should literally cover every topic related to tort law. What else? The other thing that's really great about treatises, not only does it have this wonderful broad coverage, but it cites the primary and secondary sources. Now that is valuable to you as a legal researcher. Because remember your goal in legal research. How do I find the law? A treatise can help point you in the right direction. Treatises tend to be written by legal scholars. They're wonderful for discussions of cases, of statutes, on that specific area of law. They tend to be critical or analytical, sometimes they're practical in nature. Examples would be Wright and Miller, Federal Practice and Procedure, Dobbs and the Law of Torts. One that you will be hearing a lot of, and I see I have misspelled it on the PowerPoint, I'm so sorry, is Dorsanio's Texas Litigation Guide. This is considered one of the Bibles of Texas procedure law. And it's in a loosely form, but that's another great example of a treatise, but it's very practical in nature. So some people would call it a practitioner resource. Treatises, as I said, are pretty easy to use. They're organized generally with a table of contents, a table of cases, and the main text. And they also have indices or an index. Supplemental materials may be found if you have a loose leaf service. I know, for example, Dorsanio's will have forms or they'll have timetables, which may be really helpful. You can find treatises in the library catalog, would be an easy way. On the course Canvas page, I have posted links to certain library guides, and one of them has been on legal treatises, which was compiled by our librarians at the Fred Parks Library. I would encourage you to look at that as well. Keep in mind, because these are really great resources, they tend to be expensive. So it's not something that most law students would just go out and buy all the treatises in their particular topic because they are so costly. Some are available free online. In fact, there are lots of study guides that are available to you guys free online. But after you graduate and when you practice, many of these resources are very costly. Consequently, sometimes it may be easier to look at a treatise in print rather than looking at it online. Here's a list of treatises I think every lawyer should be familiar with, especially if you're going to go out and be a summer associate or intern and you want to, if someone says, I need you to look at antitrust law, you need to know who some of the top names are in those areas. So this is just a bonus slide on treatises you should know. Let me try to distinguish a treatise from a horn book, because oftentimes students confuse the two. Same thing with nutshells. A horn book is a great study aid, but it's not a study aid like Sum and Substance or manuals or those other type of study aids. A horn book is kind of like a baby treatise to the extent that it gives you a presentation of the law, and it's fairly broad. It's very straightforward, it's very clear. It's marketed actually for student use and understanding. They can be useful for case finders. They tend to be limited to those landmark Supreme Court cases. They're not going to cover everything. The goal in a horn book is to help students get a broad overview of the subject area. But it's not going to be as detailed or as scholarly or as analytical as a treatise would be. But they are a lot more affordable than a treatise. Another type of student aid that some people assume is a form of treatise, but it actually isn't, or In a Nutshell series or the Understanding series that you may have heard of from Lexis. These are paperback books, kind of like horn books, that are meant to give students a good, quick overview of an area of law. The interesting thing about the In a Nutshell library, the In a Nutshell series, I don't think I've ever walked into any legal library that didn't have a set. So this is very accessible to students, okay? They're going to be in almost every library. It may be a useful study aid if you're tired of looking at all the leaves and the veins on a tree and you want to see the whole forest. This can help you look at the whole forest. These are not ideal for research. They're not going to have a lot of citations or a lot of analysis. So while they may be good study aids, these are not the same as a treatise. The third, very, very helpful form of secondary source would be legal periodicals, specifically law reviews. I want to highlight law reviews, and we're going to go ahead and touch on all the different legal periodicals. So a legal periodical can come basically in two general forms. I'm going to divide them. They can be scholarly in the form of a law review, or they can be specialized or commercial, like a bar journal. And there are lots of bar journals out there, as well as legal newspapers. Let's start with law review articles. Law review articles are very thoroughly researched. They tend to look at policy perspectives. They tend to develop a thesis about what the law should be, or they'll criticize a case or some aspect of the law, or point out some contradictions, and oftentimes argue for change or advance the dialogue in some way, right? From a legal researcher perspective, this kind of secondary source is really helpful because every law review article has as its first or second section an overview section. And that overview section tends to give a summary of the law. And in giving a summary of the law, it almost always will give you those landmark court decisions that you need for that area that you're researching and any pertinent statutes. So these are great, easy tools to use. I highly recommend them. Here are some drawbacks. It's not going to be updated, right? So once a law review article is written, it's written. No one's going to go back and try to make it fresh again. So if there are new cases, you're going to have to shepherdize and do some additional research. Doesn't mean it's not a good finding tool, though. Law review articles can be useful for that summary, but sometimes the entire article itself really is focusing on policy and advancing a scholarly dialogue. So it may not be completely helpful to you as a researcher to pass those 2 or 3 introductory sections. Some people find law review articles difficult to locate. It really depends if you like to research in print or online. And we're going to talk about locating those articles. Now, law review articles, as you should know, every law school has a flagship law review. We have the South Texas College of Law Houston Law Review. These are published by student editors at law schools. They can be general or focus on a specific area of the law, like our journal, Currents. Oftentimes, the law review editors will solicit lead articles from experts. That's going to be law professors, it's going to be judges, it's going to be practitioners who are very well known in their area. And they're asked to address very narrow legal issues. But in addressing those legal issues, they usually provide that context and those great sites of primary authority. In fact, most law review articles are written, if you kind of divide a page, with about a third part of that text page is going to be text, and the rest is going to be footnotes. And the value in a law review article for research purposes is all going to be in that footnote. Now, in addition to articles from legal scholars, law reviews gives opportunities for students to publish as well. Usually, these student articles are listed as a note or comment section. They can be very helpful. They tend to have a critical analysis of a recent case or a statute or critique some current issue of interest. They're very useful. They're still very respected. Even though they're written by students, these tend to be students who are on law review who did the work. So here you can still find some great citations to primary authority. Now we also have bar journals. Now bar journals can be local, national, state. A great example is the ABA Journal, or American Bar Association Journal. I'm not sure if you've ever read the ABA Journal, but it looks just like a magazine. Bar journals tend to emphasize practical aspects of the law. They are usually not very critical, and you certainly aren't going to see those wonderful, rich footnotes that you would see in a law review article. Since you can't get all of those great citations of primary authority, they're not nearly useful as being a research tool. They can have some interesting articles, though. Legal newspapers are very similar. They can also have a scope that's national, local, or state. They tend to be published on a regular basis. However, they're probably starting to die down a bit. Legal newspapers are great to find out information about settlements. They're helpful to find hot topic developing areas of the law. But the drawback, which is true for many of our secondary sources, you can't update it. So remember, you can have treatises that are updated. State encyclopedias can be updated. Most legal periodicals, certainly law review articles, are not going to be updated. So how do you go about finding these periodicals? Well, first of all, in print. Now, the library at South Texas College of Law does not keep up with anymore the ILP, Index to Legal Periodicals, or Current Law Index. And I never sent my students to them anyway because they weren't cumulative. So it was literally like doing some kind of crazy scavenger hunt just to look for one article. totally inefficient. A more productive way really is to go online. One free way to go online is to use Google Scholar. Not just Google, but Google Scholar to see if you can find some scholarly articles. There's also SSRN, Social Science Research Network, which I will post a link to on Canvas. But just doing a general Google search on the internet probably isn't going to yield you a lot of results. Other easy ways to find legal periodicals would be online through paid services like Westlaw or Lexis. Certainly there are other vendors as well, like Bloomberg Law too. You can also go to the library webpage and take advantage of the Legal Track database. And I didn't list it here, but also on the library webpage is a program called Hein Online. Hein Online does a wonderful job not only of capturing many legal periodicals, but they make them available in a PDF format so you can print them out for free. So that is the end of our talk. I'm going to stop the share on secondary sources. I hope you found it helpful. Our next short video will talk about the other secondary sources. Enjoy the rest of your day.